There are almost as many ways of painting ultramarines as there are miniature painters. And today I'm going to show you 3 different ways. But relax guys, because after this video you can forget about the rest, because these are the only 3 ways you're ever gonna want to paint ultramarines for your armies ever again. So let's get started with the first one. This one is going to be all about speed, and the way we're gonna save most of the time and still get a nice volumetric highlighting is in the priming step. So we start out by priming the miniature black like always. And then when we move into the zenithal highlight step, instead of zenithal highlighting it with a white primer, we're going to do it with a magic blue from Vallejo. And we have 2 different reasons why we love this spray can. The first one is the pigmentation of these spray cans is really fine. So when we spray the black miniature from above with this blue, you're going to have a nice transition from the dark black to an even bright blue highlight on the top. So spraying a few different thin coats with this from above is going to give you an amazing looking volumetric highlight on the miniature before we even bring out the paintbrush. When your miniatures have dried, we bring out a sponge. We bring out used foam bits from different shipping packagings, but if you don't have that, you can bring out the car washing sponge, or maybe even the packaging from your old Games Workshop case. We dab some Vallejo Andrea blue into the sponge and make sure that it's not too thick, but we don't want it to be like a dry brush either, so somewhere in between that. And apply this to mostly the raised areas on the miniature, anything that is raised towards the sky. If you want to push this a little bit more, you can bring out Vallejo Sky Blue, but this time add it to an even smaller surface than the previous step. And as a final detail, we're adding an edge highlight to the top panel on top of his helmet. And on the eye sockets around the eyes. And with that, we should have our highlighting on the miniature done. Moving on to the metal parts, let's keep this super simple. Cover all of the gun parts, the joints, and tubes in chainmail. The other parts of the gun, we simply paint them with a Vallejo black. And then the aquilas, the trims, and any other fitting details in glorious gold. Once dry, you can add a layer of thinned down contrast paints Black Templar on some of the areas to get some definition. And what's really going to sell the effect of the miniature looking like a finished model is the eyes. Don't forget about these. Just by adding a little bit of ivory on the eyes and then some fluorescent orange around it is going to make it look like they're glowing orange. And this step takes less than a minute. You don't even have to be clean about the fluorescent orange because it's just gonna add to the effect of it feeling like the light is glowing outside of the eye. So the paint job is done, but the miniature isn't. You can add any texture paint you have to the base. We're adding some Sterling Battle Mire in this case, but you can use anything from Vallejo or Green Stuff or whichever brand you have at home. We then add some rust pigments. In this case, we're using rust orange. We pre-mix the pigments in a cup, using about 10 drops of water and 1 drop of airbrush thinner. So it almost becomes like a pigment wash. Spread this out on the base and a little bit on the bottom of the miniature, and then let it dry. If we need to, we can go in with a Q-tip and clean up some of the parts where we have too much, but other than that, it should be done by now. And this miniature took Lucas about 20 minutes of active brush time. Of course, he is an experienced painter, and the first couple of times that you do this is going to take you more time. But once you get experienced and once you've done this a few times, you can knock out a unit of these easily in an evening. Especially if you do this in an assembly line fashion. Now guys, we are ready for marine number 2 using contrast paints. Forget about slap shop, let's make it easier and better looking. We're going to start off by priming the miniature black again. But this time, instead of using the blue, we're going to use a white zenithal highlight. And one thing to note, that many spray can primer brands, especially with their white paints, do not have a fine enough pigmentation to give you a smooth transition from the white to the black. The Citadel Corax White is the worst offender in this case, especially considering its price. So if you decide to buy the cheaper primers, you might end up with a not as good result. The white primer from Vallejo is definitely our favorite spray can white primer, but your experience might speak for something different. If it does, let us know in the comments. And now there's 2 ways you can go on to the next step, either by adding the contrast paints with a brush or using an airbrush. Both work equally fine, but the airbrush is going to save you so much more time, especially if you're doing an entire army. Because then you can spray everything with the airbrush in one step and easily have the blue down in no time on the entire army. So to show you guys how to do it optimally, we're going to use the airbrush today, but remember you can do it all using a regular brush. We start off by spraying almost the entire miniature with the contrast paint Frost Heart. Once the Frost Heart is dry, we bring out the Azurman Blue contrast paint and spray that from below and in all of the crevices, underneath the arms and between the legs. If you want this paint job to be super fast, you already have a really nice zenithally highlighted miniature at this step, and you could go to the metal steps already now. But as always with Squidmar, we want to take it a little extra step to make it look a little bit better. So we're gonna punch the highlight using the regular brush, adding 1 layer where we mix Andrea Blue and Sky Blue about 50-50. What is now important is to add the highlight to the right areas. But Emil, what the frick does the right areas mean? Okay, let's bring out the test dummy. A quick rundown on the basics. All sphere-shaped parts are highlighted with a sphere shape at the top of the part. All cylindrical shaped things are highlighted across the cylindrical shape, meaning that things like arms, staffs, or legs are highlighted across the entire surface, and things like heads or shoulder pads are highlighted at the top of it with a spherical shape. This can also include things like the top of the kneecaps or the round things on the top of the backpacks of Space Marines. This can of course vary a little bit when you have things that have a combination of shapes, like the shoulder pads that are circular and spherical shaped at the top and then go down to a flat shape on the side. But these are general things that you can keep in mind when adding a highlight to one of these parts. Flat areas like the beaks of the helmet. What we want to do with a part like this is to highlight the part that has its side towards the light source and then contrast that with the shadowy side on the other side that doesn't get hit by light, creating a really nice contrasting effect. And this is not the end all be all, but it gives you a starting point when adding the highlights to your miniature. On the head, we start by adding it to the top panel. We also add it to the rounder surface that's kind of the main shape of the head, all the way up to that panel. So we have a nice rounded shape at the top. If you want to spice things up, it takes about a second or two to just add an edge highlight to the top parts of the eye sockets. And as you can see on this piece, Lucas then adds a final highlight on the shoulder piece, the backpack, the arms, and of course the knee pads. And with that, the painting should be done. And while Lucas paints metal on this bad boy, let's talk about this week's sponsor, Warhammer 40k Warpforge. An up-and-coming, free-to-play collectible card game, fast-paced and fun to play in your favorite Warhammer universe. The game has just launched on early access on Steam and actually yesterday launched on iPhone and Android. And the best thing is the game is cross-platform, so you can play it against all your friends whatever platform they're using. Right now you can play with 6 of the most popular Warhammer 40k factions like the Ultramarines, Goth Orcs, Sect Necrons, Black Legion, Alderi Craftworld, and the Tyranid High Fleet Leviathan. And they've told us that this is just the beginning, there is much more to come. And unlike most card games in Warforged, your leader is in the battlefield leading from the front. And each one of these armies have unique mechanics, keeping the game super interesting for hours upon hours. And because Lucas and I want you to try out this game and have as much fun with it as we have, we've managed to squeeze a Squidmar exclusive promo code from Warforged and give you not 1 but 5 freaking free booster packs. All you gotta do is enter the promo code Squidmar and you'll be up and running and beating your friends in no time. Follow our links down in the video description and download the game for free and have some fun with it tonight. And now I think it's time to reveal how beautiful this miniature looked. Time to reveal. And of course, speaking about ultramarines that are amazing in games, let's talk about the third way of painting an ultramarine. For this paint job, we're going to use the airbrush quite a bit. And honestly, doing this paint job without an airbrush is kind of dumb because it's going to take you a little bit too much time for it to be worth when painting an army. But if you're just doing like one miniature for display painting, you can do all of these steps just using the regular paintbrush. We start off by bringing out dark sea blue and spraying that through the airbrush from above. But not only from above, because we're covering about 90% of the miniature with dark sea blue, only leaving the most dark areas underneath the arms and underneath the legs black. So you can angle it a little bit to the front and the back of the model without feeling like you've overdone it. The second step is also through the airbrush. This will be to add like a second blue zenithal highlight. We're mixing 50-50 Andrea blue and dark sea blue, spraying it from above. This time covering only about 50-60% of the model, again leaving the darker areas and the areas angled downwards with the dark sea blue and black, and only spraying this on all of the areas that are angled towards the sky. And this is all we're gonna do with the airbrush. You can now put that aside and bring out your wet palette and your regular brush. What is now important is to add the highlight to the right areas. And that is what's going to sell 90% of the effect of this being a professionally painted miniature. So we bring out Andrea blue and we just have to add this highlight to the areas that are angled towards the sky. Starting off with the legs, adding one highlight on the kneecap, the upper edge of the protection above that, and following the shape of the thigh. And when adding these highlights, you don't have to highlight everything on the entire miniature. We focus on the areas that are angled upwards, so the shoulder pads that not in focus doesn't need to be highlighted just as much. And the same thing with the arms. The arm that's behind the weapon doesn't need the same type of highlight as the arm that's in front of the miniature. On the shoulder pads, we're going to create sort of a triangular shape of the highlight. Starting going all the way up to the edge of the panel rim, and then going slightly downwards about 50% down on the shoulder pad, having a somewhat triangular pattern. And then we do the round shape on the top of the head. We're adding a highlight to one side of the face. For the raised panel on top of the head, we're doing the highlight going kind of across the entire thing. Again, we're following the shape of the miniature, so it's important that you do that with the highlight as well. We then want to punch the miniature with a second highlight. We're mixing Andrea blue with about 50% sky blue and adding it on the same areas, but this time doing it on only about 30% of the area where we added Andrea blue. And the paint is thinned down to about a mix between glaze and layer consistency. And mapping out highlights like this can be a bit daunting the first time, and it's going to take you a lot of time. But once you've done 3-4 of these marines, you're going to know exactly where to place the highlights, and you're going to be able to smash through these in half an hour to 40 minutes. And they're going to look amazing and really pop on the gaming table. Okay, we have 2 more steps to do. The first one is going to be the obvious, add all of the metal colors that we used in the previous steps. So chainmail and glorious gold. And once that is done, we're gonna bring out the airbrush one last time. We've got a magenta ink, and we're using Vallejo, but you can use green stuff, P3, or whichever brand you have. And spray that from below, really thin down, just to add a nice contrasting color on the miniature. And having magenta instead of a dark blue is a nice contrasting color that it's just difficult to explain, but it makes the miniature pop in a different way. And we just spray these to the shadows. Never add the magenta to the highlights because then it's gonna bring down the miniature. This is just for the shadows. And once you got the base skedaddle skedoodle added, the miniature is done. And with that, you've learned 3 different ways of painting ultramarines to a really nice and high level in a short amount of time. Guys, if you're a Warhammer nerd, don't forget to download the free game Warforged down below. It's such a fun game to play and it doesn't cost you anything. With that, thanks all patrons for supporting this channel. Have a great day. Bye bye.